As a teacher of IGCSE, Cambridge IGCSE Computer Science and A-Level, I found a YouTube author called James Gann, and he provides some slides which I find very useful for my students, and he also goes through them on his YouTube channel. He also, like a few others, goes through the unseen scenario and tries to go through and explain how to do those. One of the problems I see with this, and it's something that I do myself as well as others, is that we seem to forget that students have to handwrite this in the exam. And when we're handwriting it in the exam, first of all, the more characters or the more code that we have to write, the longer it's going to physically take to write. Secondly, when we're handwriting it, we cannot easily decompose and do a little bit and then go back and insert code that, like we can do when we're using a text editor. And so it's okay showing how we break it down. And if we were writing it in a text editor, Visual Studio, for example, then the way that he teaches this is perfect. And I'm not going to take anything away from his actual final code. What I want to do is actually see if I agreed with it. Was there any way I could change it? And in reality, apart from one mistake, which if I'm being picky I would dock 1 mark for, his actual code is absolutely spot on. The problem is, as I've said, is that the way he goes through it is not particularly intuitive for a student who has to write it by hand. But I'm not going to criticize that because I do that and everybody else does that. But what I am going to try and do is show how we can change his code slightly so that if we think ahead a little bit more, we can reduce the amount of code that we need to write in an exam, which gives us more thinking time. And so what I've done is I've taken his code that he wrote and I have put that into PyCharm. We can see, and at the moment there's nothing in these other files. This is his exact code. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take his code and I'm going to copy it into the final. And one thing we'll note is, and this is the actual code starting in here, is we should try and remember that this takes 1200, almost 1240 characters. That's what we need to write about, and it is, in terms of lines, it is 45 line breaks, but that includes these spaces, but there's only these 2 spaces in here, so we have 43 lines. So how can I fix this? Well, the first thing, as I said, is a slight mistake. He copied and pasted in his code. Actually, his code looked like this. Just needed to make that one change to make sure that this met the requirements 100%. Otherwise, as he had it on his, that would not find the lowest value. So let's have a quick look at some of the changes that we can make. Well, first of all, he says, well, we need to get the highest index and we need to then output the team name with the highest index, but we don't need to record the highest index. We need to record the team name at the highest index. So we can say, instead of highest index, we can say the highest team is the team at the current team counter, and we can say the lowest team is in this particular case, and so we can change this here, and we can change that here, and then we can just put highest team here and lowest team here. Now we had 1237. I'm going to suggest now that that has actually changed it, and it looks worse, 1255 characters. So we seem to have made things worse. But let's see how, now that we've got that, we can simply say, that the current team is team at team counter. So we're going to hoist this variable up to the top here, and if we can use current team here, and we can use current team here and here and here and here. And how does that change the situation? Okay, and so going to that, it is still worse. So that's not a particularly good start, but that's okay, because we're now going to make some other changes. So first thing I'm going to do is what James says here is that he talks about the book, and how in the book it tells you that how we deal with an array, and how we if we're doing a max and a min algorithm, then we always, if it's the first item, we set it to that particular item. That way we make sure that the min and the max are in acceptable levels. Now, of course, if you also look at the book, they will do something like max is, and the max should be the lowest possible number. So we can have max is that, and min is the highest possible number. And in reality, if we did that, we can actually get rid of all of this code here. Now, of course, you might be then screaming, well, yes, but we don't know what the max and the minimum is because this is an array. But that's not quite true in this particular case, and we are clever. We can think about this because we know, looking at this, that if a team lost every single game, the lowest possible score it could have is 0. In which case, the lowest is what we assign to max. And then how do we know what the maximum possible value would be? Well, in here we can see if we win every game, then we win 3 points times however many matches we've played. So we can say the match number is that times by 3. That's the maximum number it could possibly be. And so, of course, we're using, instead of using highest points instead of max, and we're using lowest points instead of that. So now we had 1237. How does that do to our code? We're now down to 1100. So we've saved over 130 characters, which is, if we're looking here, that's almost this amount of lines of code, which in an exam is quite a lot. But what we haven't had to do is we haven't had to worry about the team index or the team index, and we haven't had to worry about if it's 1 and come back and worry about that later. We can just simply use a little bit of maths to work out what the lowest and the highest values should start out at. And on its own, that is probably just enough to make things a little bit easier for those in an exam to save that. But of course, if we wanted to save a little bit more time, well, we could say to ourselves, well, how can I reduce? I can reduce this code here. I can reduce this. The only reason I can do that is because we got 0, 1, 2, and 3. These are incremental values. So what I can do is I could and I don't need to declare an array, so I'm going to put that before our recap. But we could declare what we call it, team stats 1 to 4. Whoops. Array 1 to 4, and these are going to call us integers. Now, of course, so the lost matches will go in the first, the drawn, the home, and away, given these are zeros. But of course, this is 0 indexed by 1, but if we wanted to, we could actually declare it 0 to 3, and there's no reason why we can't do that. So why not? But let's assume that you didn't know how to do that, or you wanted to leave it as 4. That makes life easy as well. So how can we use that? Well, first things first again is I'm going to cache the team points. So I'm going to call this the current points, and now I can change this out to be current points here, and then obviously if I left it like that I could do case of current point. But we know we can say that the team stats at, and in this case for a lost match it's whatever current points is, because if we have 3 points it's going to store it in position 4. If we have 2 points, it's going to store it in position 3 and 2, and so we can now store this information in 1. So team stats at current 1 is equal to team stats at current plus 1, and we need to add 1 to that, and that reduces all of that code here. But the problem is, of course, is that we need to set them all to be 0. So we are going to need to go and initialize these to, so it says you don't need to initialize the other ones, but we do need to do that. And that takes us down to, so that helps us with that. Now, of course, here's the problem. The problem is we've added some extra code, but now we can take these 4 and put them into another loop. So we can go for I is 1 to 4, and we can simply output team stats at I, and that saves all of that. But again, the problem we have is that team stats needs to be set to be 0. So once we have output it, we need to set that back to be 0. How does that look for our code now? So now we're actually down to 1022 characters. So we've saved over 200 characters, but the reality is that because we are now using the array for that, so those 1, 2, 3, 4 lines of code, when we added these 3 lines of code, of which one was simply a next I, we can now remove those pieces of code as well. And so now if we look down to here, we're actually down to 949 characters and 37 lines. So we've saved over 5 lines of code. We've saved almost 300 characters, which is, in terms of 300, that's around this amount of code, which is quite a lot of code when we are thinking about an exam question. And so by using some simple techniques like taking this, we've replaced 4 lines with 3 lines, Then we've taken this, and we had 4 lines. Unfortunately, we didn't save a great deal of here, but we saved all of that case statement here. Now, it's not always possible to do that, but again, if we're thinking ahead, then that's the way that we can make these changes. And so that is another way of answering this question, which reduces the amount of code that we physically need to write. Now, I don't like pseudocode, and I want to then see, does this actually work in Python? So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take this code here and I'm going to convert it to Python. Okay, now one other thing I wanted to do actually, as I thought about it, is I'm going to be picky. In pseudocode we use // Okay, so we want this, and this will work perfectly for Python. The only difference is that we need to put a comma here, and that's fine. Now, of course, we don't declare, so we can do that. Now, of course, I would use camel case, but for the purpose of this, we are going to fix this. Well, first, only thing I'm going to do first is I'm not sure why this has formatted how it is, but that's life. So I'm just going to pause the video for 2 seconds and get these correct. And so we're back. It's now in our Python file, and this is the pseudocode. And of course, because it's Python, it's screaming at us, but we're going to help sort that out. So as I said before, we don't need this and we don't need that, and ordinarily I would use snake case, but for the moment we're going to look at that. Now, of course, we want a hash for a comment. So the first thing, obviously, in terms of making this work, we don't want to use, so I'm just going to fix these left arrows here and here and here, here, gosh, quite a few of them. Here and here, so I'm just going to remove those. Okay, so now we can, in Python, these team stats, we can simply rewrite that as team stats as equal to, we can just simply set those to be an empty array of 0. Now I am going to cheat, and I am going to use that 0 to 4 instead, sorry, 0 to 3 instead of 1 to 4. So how do we replace this line here? Well, we go for for team counter. Again, I'm going to keep these variable names in range and league size, and the current team is equal to we called it team name at team counter. Total points is 0. We're going to come to that in a moment. Again, for match counter in range match number, and in order to do, we have a jagged array in Python, so we would write it like that, and team stats at, we just want to use its current points, so team stats, so that is pretty straightforward. I'm just going to comment that line so we know there's a next, and then we can do print here and print here. I'm going to change that to be print 2, and rather than putting that in here, we can just reset, oops, set it after the loop, put a comment in here, and this is simply for I in range 4, good spell, and print team stats. I'll just keep it as capital I, just so that everything, we don't have to change anything else. Again, lowercase, and we don't need the then, in which case first thing we can do is just unindent that and comment that out. Lowercase if with a colon, indent these, comment that out, and then print highest team and print lowest team. And that's giving us Python because highest team is not actually defined until we get into here. So technically it might be none, but in this particular case it won't be. And so let's just check here. So we're looping through here, we're setting the current name here, we're looking at the total points, because we're doing that for each individual. We are doing that, so we should know, so it should print out 3, the Arsenal, and the total points would be 7, and then it would be 3 away. Well, let's just see what we get. The beauty of writing it in a pie chart, for example, is it will give us an answer pretty quickly. And so we can see that Arsenal scored 3, 6, 7. They had, so let's have a look. We've got 2 away wins, which are these 2. We've got 0 home wins, which is would be a 2. We've got 1 draw, and we've got 1 lose. And so these figures are absolutely correct. Liverpool scores 12, and of course these are the other way, opposite way round. If I really wanted to be the exact as it was before, I'd simply say print team stats at 4 minus I. I think that's the way to do it. No, it would be 3 minus I. Two away wins, no away home wins, 1 draw and 1 loss. Of course, if we really wanted to, we could do a start at 3, go to -1, and step in -1, and we could do it that way as well. Gives us exactly the same output, depending on how you want to do that. Let's have a look now at keeping this part of it. We're actually down to just 906 characters, and of course if we really wanted to be totally Pythonic and not leave any of these in, then from an exam point of view we're down to just 833. That's 400 characters of code. So if we take our original code and we look at 400 characters, we've saved about half, well, just over half, maybe 40% of code by writing it in Python and in writing it with the changes that I made. We've saved about 250 characters, which is about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, about 10 lines of code. So this is an excellent answer. It does the job. It's relatively straightforward and easy to understand. But of course, what we still haven't discussed is the fact that however you look at it, when James or others explain it, they write a piece of code and then they go and insert and make a change. And so what I try to do in the exam is find a blank piece of paper. There's usually many blank pieces of paper at the end. Do my prep on there, do my decomposition, and then come back and write it. 5 minutes of writing in the what you might call in the design stage is going to make a real difference.